This is Rick Wakeman, and you're listening to Key to Keys Rock. I really don't like wishing time away, but I'm looking forward very soon to be talking to my great friend Tony Banks, who I promised at the beginning of the show will be coming on for a chat. He is an amazing musician, songwriter, of course, co-founder of Genesis, and just to give you a little taster of what's to come, here he is on the track Firth of Fifth. Firth of Fifth, and I'm glad I got that out of the way.
Yeah.
Did you do it deliberately?
Well, the title.
The title,
well,
yeah.
It was just a pun on Firth of Forth. And
yeah.
It was just kind of like, I didn't really have much idea for a title, and I'd written a fairly meaningless lyric. And I just thought, that worked really. And it's one of those things. I don't think of the name anymore. It's a bit like the Beatles. You don't really think about the word.
No.
It's just a name.
But the piano intro became really quite iconic, didn't it?
Well, it's become a sort of a bit of a party piece for a lot of people, actually. And you get endless versions of it on YouTube, all playing it far better than I ever did. And I've seen people play it live. I think the only thing I would say is some people play it too fast. It shouldn't be played too fast. I think it has to be played, the sort of speed I played. If it gets too fast, it just sounds a bit technical without sounding sort of emotive, But I think I'm still very proud of the piece. It's originally 50 years ago or something.
Did it come before the main piece?
I was sort of... Well, I've written for that particular song, it had 3 sections, which were all originally supposed to be independent. I had the piano bit, which was the first bit.
Yeah.
And then I had a little flute and piano solo, which I wasn't sure what to do with. And then I had what was the main song. And then we sort of adapted it. I'll just play the flute and piano solo because it's like, it was just, I haven't played this piano, never played this piano before. I'm just telling everyone what I'm doing here, so. That's how it starts anyhow.
Yeah.
And it sounded really nice with the flute and the piano. And Steve Hackett, who was the guitarist at the time, said, let's try it big. And I said, I don't know, he said, well, let's give it a go, see what happens. So I got out all the mellotrons and organs and everything, and he got out the lead guitar, and Phil joined in on the drums, and we did this version. And to be honest, that part of the song, which is now the guitar solo, has probably become even more iconic in a way than the piano solo. It did sound very, very good, I think. And it's so the song, the instrumental parts of the song are probably the best parts about it. But it was,
great melodies.
Yeah, well, it was, I was very proud of the melody, both melodies when I'd written them. And, as I said, that's a very simple and slow melody, even if I can't play it. And the introduction was a much more sort of complicated thing, which evolved over a period of time. I'd written a sort of something slightly simpler, and it just sort of embellished it, and it worked.
I'm not going to go harping back to the roots and all that kind of like, because everybody knows all your history. But there's one thing that's always intrigued me about every musician friend that I've got is that when they started out, the names that were chosen for bands that they were in.
All right.
So I've got to ask you, where Garden Wall, was it?
Well, I never knew the band was called Garden Wall.
Okay. But you were in it?
Well, we were in it. It sort of seemed to sort of, there was a group while we were at school, which had Peter on drums and Ant Phillips, original guitarist, on the guitar. And we just played in this concert at the end of term. Actually, I was playing piano because we didn't have anything else at the time. We couldn't get the piano onto the stage, so I was playing at the front. And so no one knew I was there, actually, until we started. I did a couple of things where I started it. We did When a Man Loves a Woman, and I just played the chords, at the front there. And they suddenly realised I was there. I said, what's that, And I probably couldn't be heard because everything else was amplified and the piano wasn't amplified. It was a very strange thing. Anyhow, we just did that one thing, and it was only sort of a long time afterwards I found that we were actually called the Garden Wall. I don't know whose idea that was.
So any of the same people was it Anon was another one that you...
Well, that was a sort of rival band in the school, and they were good by comparison.
Right. So did you...
Ant was in both bands because he's the only guy in the school who owned a guitar. But Mike was, sometimes played in that band as well, although they fell out at one point and he joined another band. He could be difficult,
It's great fun, wasn't it?
It was. Well, it was fun, and I was always right from the word go much more interested in writing music, and Peter and I used to write songs together, and then we got together because Mike and Ant were writing songs as well. And we made a tape together, and that's kind of how we got together. We'd never really played before.
How did you write as a pair?
Well, we'd probably, one of us would have an idea, piano, a few chords or something, and then we'd sort of work on it, embellish it, and stick bits together. Peter probably wrote more of the lyrics back in those days. I mean, I did write lyrics for some of them, but I never cared that much about it. I was more into the some pieces were written totally by one and totally by the other. We tend to sort of very much pool our ideas, and then obviously when we got together as a 4-piece, we did that to a greater extent.
But then when you started playing and playing live, you had the same problem that I had and a lot of other people had as well. A lot of stuff on the piano, but there wasn't one decent instrument that you could actually take out on the road that sounded like a piano.
That's right. So I find that most of the songs that were originally based on piano tended to, fall by the wayside.
I heard you once, and you're going to tell me, no, you didn't.
Probably.
But I'm sure I heard you once on an interview, or it might have been in something like Melody Maker or Sounds or whatever, where you said that you weren't actually that fond of the organ. You only played it because it was the only other alternative when there wasn't a piano. Is that
I could believe I said that.
Yeah? Oh, okay.
Well, I think because the early days I liked the piano. I used to play the piano, and when we did our early demos and everything, I just played piano, and I used to love doing that. But, once the organ, you got used to the idea of the organ, and then it sort of developed from there, really. And I think once we got all the other electronic instruments, sort of mellotrons, synthesizers and everything, I got very into all that. I suppose the sounds of them,
But on pianos, there were a plethora of electric pianos floating around at the time, and you and I actually followed a similar path with pianettes and then the old CPs from Yamaha and various, and you tried to convince yourself that they were doing the job. Well, it did.
The Hohner pianette was sort of quiet. I didn't really try and play too much sort of piano parts on that. I mean, I found it okay, and then, in order to get a variety of sound out of it, I used to put it through a fuzz box, which was sort of something I'd seen. I think I saw Dave Caffinetti with Rare Bird do it, and I thought it was a great sound. And I used that quite extensively, and we had songs like The Musical Box, which used quite a lot of that. It's a good, thick sound. I mean, a lot of people thought it was guitar, actually, but you could get the same sort of body of like a big fuzz guitar chord out of it, and I used to like doing that. So, so I had the one I had in between, obviously the Hohner pianette and the CP70 was the RMI electric piano, which I found I liked for its own sake, but trying to play the piano parts on it, and we Fifth, which you heard earlier on, I used to try and play that on that. One of the worst things about it was the fact that it didn't have the top octave. So there's a moment in Fifth where it goes up to the high octave.
Your hands fell off.
And I had to then drop an octave. I had to remember to do that. I remember one night we were playing at Drury Lane in London and doing this introduction, and I was sort of getting quite into it. This is actually sounding okay, and got there, and I forgot. So it was like that terrible moment. I started to stop, and the group looks at me like, what's going on? And Phil just goes, 3, 4, and we go into the song like that.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. What was rather sweet was that my father was there, who was completely tone deaf. He got his earplugs in anyhow. And he thought I was just taking a bow when I stopped.
It's excellent.
Which is very sweet.
Oh, they were great, the RMO, made by the Allen Organ Company. So they were an organ company, really. But the difficulty was because there was no touch control or anything at all.
No, that's right. No touch sensitivity. So everything came out the same thing. So if you played a bum note, the note next to it came out just as loud, So that was... you just sort of flicked off a note. You didn't get sort of like that, you just get them like that happening, and it was just really nasty.
So when digital pianos came out, like me, you must have shouted hooray to the clouds.
Yeah, well, I love all that stuff, and I suppose, it also gives you the ability to cheat, which I suppose is not such a good thing, but it means you can error correct so much more easily when you're recording and stuff.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, mellotrons, you mentioned mellotrons, and you used a lot mellotrons. They were not the most reliable.
Well, they were designed.
Wasn't that polite? That was really
very polite.
Yeah.
Well, you use them as well. Those original ones were designed to just stay in a living room and just provide a bit of entertainment. So people had these little sort of junka sounds in the bottom, and then you'd play the right hand was melody lines and things. But it was just the first ability you had of playing a string chord, and a brass chord, and then later on when they brought out the second one, the vocal chords and it just was a fantastic sound,
I thought the fun thing was that at the time the Musicians' Union got very irate because they said that it was taking away the jobs of violin players, string players and brass players. And yet the truth of the matter is it had a sound of its own. It didn't sound remotely like a string section or remotely like a brass section. And
you couldn't play it like a proper string part. It had an incredibly slow attack, and the notes would only last a certain length of time.
And the more notes you pressed down, the motor went slower. I must admit,
when I first got the thing, I just found these two chords that just sounded magic on it. They were very out of tune, strings and brass together with the bass note, just these two chords which were, which are nice chords.
Yeah.
But on that instrument, they just sounded like dynamite.
One thing that puzzled me, and I think I can probably guess the answer, which will be down to being so busy, but because you're a very strong melody writer in what you do, I'm surprised you haven't done more films. You've done, what, half a dozen or something like that?
Yeah, well, I tried doing films. I had a period. I did a couple of times I was asked to do films in the early days, and I couldn't do it because of Genesis commitments.
Yeah.
I did an early film called The Shout, which I wrote music, in fact, with Mike. But most of the music used in it was, well, there was some stuff written by Rupert Hind in there as well, but the main theme and stuff I wrote. Yeah. And I thought it worked pretty well, but Mike had a bit of a go at the director because he didn't like the way it was done, and that sort of meant that particular avenue was closed to me for a while. I then did a film with Michael Winner called The Wicked Lady, which was, well, one of the worst films ever made, and let's be honest about it. But the music in it was lovely, I think. And what it did for me was first time I worked very close with an arranger, a guy called Christopher Palmer, and I'd written a very simple melody line, and I just was amazed at the way it sounded when the orchestra played it. Yeah. So, and that kind of in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if ever I get bored of doing this, I'd love to work with an orchestra properly, because I love classical music and I love the orchestral sound.
Which indeed you did, didn't you?
Well, I've done that. That's what I've been doing, really. Back in about 90, we did a Genesis tour with a different singer. After that, we sort of pretty much knocked it on the head. So I thought, well, before I give up, if I'm not going to do anything more, I must just try doing this orchestral thing, And so I did. It was quite a traumatic experience, really, because, you've had experience of classical world and working with orchestras and stuff, which I've never had. And I did find it quite difficult to get real commitment out of the musicians and everything. But anyway, I did a piece which ended up being called Seven, a suite for orchestra, which I think 2 or 3 pieces worked really well, with an arranger called Simon Hale, who did some great stuff. But the orchestra was kind of difficult. I couldn't get them to really, really commit. The slow stuff was good, but as soon as it got any kind of rhythm, it wasn't right.
You've got this thing about numbers. You've had 5th and you had 7th.
Well, I got 7. The next one was called 6.
6 pieces.
I got another one's going to come out. I'm afraid I've got 5 pieces on it, so I can't avoid it. I was going to desperately try and avoid that.
Because 6 came after
7, 6, 5. I know. I'm going the other way to Adele. She's done okay. So.
Yeah. Do you miss playing full time with the band?
Not really. When I go backstage, I went backstage to see Phil play when he played in the Albert Hall recently and stuff. You get a bit of that feeling, about the life and the world and everything. But I've never considered myself really a performer. I was always a writer. I really only played because no one else would. And I was of the keyboard players in the band, although Peter was actually not a bad keyboard player and he was singing anyhow. I was the best keyboard player. So, and I wrote on piano, so that was all logical to do that, really. I didn't particularly want to. when I'm on stage, I'm extremely unemotive. And because I don't find it very easy to sort of to be anything other than that. I'm not like you with your cape and your flow and stuff. I'd love to be able to do all that stuff. I'll amaze people one day and do it.
One last thing I wanted to ask you is, you had a very distinctive Leslie sound, which was unlike any other Leslie sound I've ever heard, and you did explain to me that it was because you'd built the Leslie that ran even slower than the.
That's right.
The usual
the original, actually, we had 2 of them, in fact. But the first one I bought off a guy, I think, who made it, because Leslies were quite expensive in those days. We couldn't afford one. Yeah. So we bought this thing. And basically, it doesn't have the tweeter spinning. All it had was one multi-frequency speaker facing upwards with going through a rotating sort of wooden thing. And I only wanted the slow sound because I liked that sort of great rich sort of sound. I didn't like the sort of the stuff, which just sort of never really appealed to me so much. And in fact, we had our 3rd drummer was a carpenter, and he made a duplicate one. So I had 2 of these things to get twice the sound, technically, and of course it never really worked. But the worst thing about these things was that I liked only the slow sound. But we had a sort of a rheostat to control the motor speed. But of course, as it got hotter, it got faster and faster. So I'd keep leaping up all the time. And when I had 2, trying to get them both at slow speeds, and I was sort of playing, and I go, and I was shouting and swearing and. Very amusing for the rest of the group, I think. So but
was it criteria of every drummer that came in and said, what's your woodworking skills like?
It was a bit like that, actually.
Great, in the early days, some of the criteria. Do you have a van?
Yeah,
do you own an amp?
Well, that's right. Well, I told you Anthony Phillips was in both groups in the school because he had a guitar. He had a person who owned a guitar. And he happened to be a very good guitarist as well, so the combination was quite good. But that was the first thing you happened to have. And when we made our first record, I borrowed an organ from a guy who's down the road from a friend of mine. And what was amazing about it was the first time we played this song, I had written a song called Fireside Song, which had a sort of, thing. And I came in and just wanted the organ to come in on the chorus. And the first time I did it, came in like that. And it was a semitone sharp. Anyhow, I thought, actually, that sounds rather good. So if you listen to the piece, it's on our album from Genesis to Revelation, when it comes in, it's a semitone sharp. And it's, again, the instrument writing the piece for you.
Listen, it's been a real great pleasure chatting with you. But I've just one last thing to finish off with, which is might sound like a bizarre question. A lot of us from the eras started back in the 60s and the 70s and onwards have had biographies and autobiographies written. Yours is in Italian.
Well, that's the only guy who dares write it. And it's great because I can't read it. Because Mike Rutherford's got a book out, which he writes about, obviously about the Greek stuff. And I think he's not very kind about me in the book. So I tell him I prodded him a bit about that. So I'm quite glad I haven't dared read Phil's book, just in case.
But has nobody thought of translating the Italian book into English?
I don't think it's really worth it.
Well, I've got to tell you, just from the stories and things you told me today, there's a book there, and it should be in English. Right. So maybe you should look at the Italian one and see if it's translatable. Thanks ever so much, Tony.
All right, thanks a lot. That's great.
It's an album where we're all involved in the writing of every track, really, apart from there's a couple that each of us do an individual track on the album, but all the rest are group-written songs. And we did that to some